Well, hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graven. It's early in the morning here in LA. I've got a cup of coffee, but I am joined, thankfully, by someone I think is a real energy booster. He is the one, the only, Tom Peters. So before I introduce Tom a little bit more, Tom, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'm going to have problems with your basic thesis because I've made so many mistakes that ranking them all is going to, I presume we've got a minimum of an hour and a half, right?
We can make this a series, maybe.
Yeah, make it a series. Absolutely.
So Tom is known for many things. Oh, for one, I find Tom's books really energizing. His tweets and videos, I really do mean that. And Tom is known for many things. He's the author of 18. Is this still right? 18, or is the new one 19?
No, the new one's 19, number 19.
The new one, my most recent mistake. But
yeah, right.
19 books, including going back to 1982, In Search of Excellence, Thriving on Chaos, 1987, and then many books later. The latest is called Excellence Now, Extreme Humanism. So I'm excited to talk about that, Tom. But looking back at a very interesting career, I mean, give it your best shot, I guess, in terms of rankings. Do you have a favorite mistake that you can tell us about?
Oh, absolutely. I had to work my ass off, but I managed to get fired from McKinsey. Now, McKinsey today is in the midst of its scumbag period, but we will avoid that, or we can talk about it if we want to. But fundamentally, I was working on the research for In Search of Excellence. And, that the backstory of that is, would take us forever. And I got totally caught up in what I was doing, and I forgot all the rules. Some people say subconsciously I was doing it on purpose. For example, in 1977, at a place like McKinsey, you did not wear hair that came down to your shoulders. You did not sign up to teach a course at the Stanford Business School and not bother to tell McKinsey that you were going to do it. So I wasn't thinking of sticking it in their ear, but I was sticking it in their ear. And they finally came through, and should have come through, and tossed me out. I don't ever like to talk about money, but I will just this one time. In Search of Excellence was not supposed to sell. The first print run was 3,000, and they thought that was generous and wild. And so when I got fired from McKinsey, I had to sign an agreement on royalties. And I ended up, percentage-wise, as I should, with 50% of the royalties. And I think I paid $25,000 for that. And, God knows what came in, but it wasn't $25,000. But I was it's the story of my life in a way. I was so totally wrapped up in the project that I just, excuse the language, didn't really give a shit. I didn't care that McKinsey said this and McKinsey said that, and I knew that I was treading on water. I mean, I will say that my co-author, Bob Waterman, once said to somebody, my major contribution to the book was spending 70% of my time keeping Tom out of trouble. And, there's probably, that number is a little high, but I'm not sure it's very high. And would I do anything differently in that regard? I don't know. I would say, and this is probably true, I don't know what kinds of answers you get in general. If you're totally passionately engaged in something, logic goes out the window. And probably 7 out of 8 times it goes bust. But on the 8th time, if you're lucky, and we had perfect timing with In Search of Excellence, you knock it out of the ballpark, knock it out of Dodger Stadium, as they say in California.
So you did have long hair. Like you were in the Seabees. You had worked in the Nixon White House. Like I have trouble picturing you with long hair.
I think it was just. I mean, you said it right. You could not find a more establishment career. grow up next to the Naval Academy, so you had that sniff around you. Go to Cornell to be an engineer. Go to the Navy for 4 years, including a couple of years in Vietnam. Come out of the Navy and just go to the Stanford Business School. And from there, you go to McKinsey. I mean, God almighty, what could be? I mean, my oldest son, I'm not going to go through what he does, but I adore him in general, but I totally adore him because his career doesn't look like mine. He didn't do that check every frigging box sort of thing. And so I think I don't know, Mark, it must have been explosive. I think I was, and I don't remember having thought, I've had enough and I want to get out of here. I mean, it was awful when I was fired, to my psyche. But I was doing what I was doing and my damned head was down. And I don't like to say I wasn't paying attention, but I kind of wasn't paying attention. And I have no effing idea why the hell I grew the hair long. Unless it was, again, excuse the language, to flip the bird at McKinsey. And I'd love to talk to a shrink about it sometime. it would be, but it wasn't a sort of thing. It was boom. I absolutely blew myself up.
And so at the time, it sounds like it caught you by surprise. Looking back at it in hindsight, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, it made sense why they fired you.
Yeah, I mean, holy moly, I was a high performing person at McKinsey. I was getting all sorts of stuff. I had this Stanford course that I was teaching. For God's sake, teaching at Stanford is no small thing. And I was doing research that I really loved doing. And I knew I was pushing the limits, but I sure as hell never thought they would pull the trigger. And so it did come out of the light blue, if not out of the dark blue. And there's no way to unravel the story easily. The book was a wild success, and in my opinion, at least, wild successes. Our book was a pretty darn decent book, and then God put his hand down on Bob and my head and gave us the most perfect timing in the history of the world. I mean, literally, the week the book was published, President Reagan announced 10% unemployment, and we hadn't had that number since the Great Depression. And we were getting the tar beaten out of us by the Japanese. As I said, it was really pretty simple. Their cars worked and ours didn't. And so the Americans who had come out of World War II as the planetary gods were getting the heck beaten out of them. And particularly with that, timing of the 10% unemployment. And as I said to somebody, all around the country, the business books moved from the back of the bookstore to the front of the bookstore. And it was perfect timing. There's one piece of it too, but we can come back to that because it's just a good life lesson.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, I mean, I'd like to hear that. Your story here makes me think of, like, there are guests who have stories where their mistake leads to better things, which is what makes it a favorite. I'm curious if that is, what is the life lesson though that you took away from this? Because the one thing I hear is, oh, sometimes good things follow a setback.
Well, I'm going to give you a very lousy answer, but you can figure out whether I'm giving you a lousy answer or not. I would bet statistically, when you get totally engrossed in something and follow your passion, statistically, you're not going to end up with a #1 bestseller in the world. But my lesson, and I'm not sure where it came from, was if you fall in love with something, then, give it your all. And I didn't care whether the damn book sold or not. I couldn't have believed that anybody had given us a book contract. And, I was giving speeches on the material and people were interested in it. But I just fell more and more deeply in love with the subject matter and, let everything else be damned. And I just don't know how to answer your question because I'd love to give you the easy answer. Follow your passions. But that's not quite right. I followed my passions and then got lucky. And there are a lot of people who follow their passions that are completely moral and completely legal, and they don't get lucky. I mean, this is really important, and I think we can tie it in to your subject matter. And to me, it's incredibly important. I've said there are three kinds of people I despise in this world. Mass murderers are number one. Child and spouse abusers are number two. And number three is successful people who believe they deserve their success.
Yeah,
that
can be a mistake.
I was in London, and this guy was driving me around town, and I don't know what we were chatting about, but it was a Lincoln Continental, and so I was in the back seat, or whatever the British equivalent of a Lincoln Continental is. And he said to me, he said, there are two kinds of people who ride in the back seat of this car. And I said, okay, I'm all ears. He said, there are people who remember their roots and people who think they deserve to be there. And I really do get furious when somebody believes that they had there's so many random things that happen to you in life. I mean, I was, thinking about it the other day. I have a new car, a Subaru Outback, but it has a huge center console, and I'm still learning it. And so I'm never looking at the damn road. I'm always looking at the console. And I know I should, and I'm old and my reactions are not as good as they were. I can't imagine what it would be to seriously wound or kill someone. And, at some level, every damn trip I take is a lucky break when I come back with having, I know the deal, slow down, pay attention, and so on. But here's a screen, and it keeps yelling at me. But at any rate, luck. I won't go anywhere beyond that topic. And I agree with the guy who was driving me around. If you say you deserved your luck and you didn't, luck. I mean, we're talking about racial equality and so on right now, as we should be. Do you really think I would be here and have had this success had I not been born in 1942, white, male, American, smart parents from the best country in the world to be from? I mean, it's at some level, that was the all-important first 99.5%. And the rest was details. And I really got, pissed off. I think it was, after the George Floyd thing or something, when people said, what's this white privilege stuff you talk about? I don't have any white privilege. Well, I sure as hell do. There is absolutely, positively, no question about that whatsoever.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to deny that or discount that. And, people say, well, I had to work hard. Well, privilege doesn't mean things are easy, but this idea of white privilege means, to your point, certain things are easier.
Yeah, much easier. I mean, you get born in 2021 to incredibly wealthy parents, and they are buying the football coach a house so that they can get him into Southern Cal or Stanford or wherever else it happens to be. That's that wasn't your doing, dude.
Right. So it sounds like kind of key point mistake is thinking that success is completely the output of your own effort or talent, and not also based on factors that you were, that weren't your choice.
Well, it also says, I think, and this is really not the way my mother brought me up, it sort of says, enjoy your life, enjoy every day. There is not a straight road trajectory from where you are to where you want to get to. There will be setbacks on top of setbacks. There will be lucky breaks. And I think it's important, really important, to know you can't control everything. Because among other things, I just think it's incredibly important.
Well, and there are a lot of things, as you write about in your most recent book, that you think are really important. And, I'd like to explore that a little bit. But, first off, looking at the title, extreme humanism. I mean, how do you define humanism, and what is, in a good way, an extreme version of that? What are some of those traits or characteristics in leaders?
I've written 19 books. I've been doing whatever I'm doing for 43 years. And it started out with the damned In Search of Excellence research. And fundamentally, I mean, I would love to have somebody buy all 19 books because I get 19 royalties. But the reality is it's one book repeated 18 subsequent times. And the big message was people first, people first, people first. People, not spreadsheets. And then, God, I'd hate to use the word luck with this. I called it in the book serendipity. The messages that I've been talking about for 43 years took on 10 times their urgency last March when the pandemic began. And people first and decent behavior toward all of your colleagues. I said about that, and I'm digressing here a little. Well, I don't want to digress. I'll digress in a minute. People first was the heart of it. Execution is 100 times more important than strategy. Any idiot with an above freezing IQ can write a gorgeous strategy document. There was this wonderful quote that I used that came from the General Bradley, the eventually 5-star, who commanded all the American troops in D-Day. And he said, amateurs talk about strategy, professionals talk about logistics. And it is those boring, dull details, which also then plays right again into the people first thing, because I'll come to your damned hotel because it's gorgeous and it has a great location. I come back because the housekeeping department is great and it is spotless to the point that it glistens. That's the repeat business thing. And that's when I put my finger on my mouse or whatever and start recommending you to other people. Execution, people, design is huge to me. And it's huge in 2 dimensions. Design, to me, Johnny Ive, the former Apple chief designer, said, "This may sound arrogant, but we hope to do things that contribute to humanity just a little bit." And I think that can apply to any enterprise of any size. I did this little riff in the book, which said no such thing as a commodity. And it was 10 or 12 or 15 attributes of a plumber who's not a commodity. And it's everything from a clean truck to a clean uniform to politeness to showing up on time to explaining to Mark what went wrong that made this thing happen so it might not happen again. And there are 100 things. And it's absolutely no different than owning a 300-room hotel, fundamentally. And they differentiate you, and they differentiate you radically.
Yeah. So when you talk about, you have those interactions with
people design. Those are trying to think what I would put, on my top 3 relative to your show. Now you are more sophisticated than I am, but I have my entire definition of innovation is WTTMSW. Whoever tries the most stuff wins. And then to really put it into and I'm not sure I can do this, Anyway, the advanced version of that is whoever tries the most stuff and screws the most stuff up the fastest wins. And I mean, that is innovation. I mean, it was really fascinating when Steve Jobs died. In many of the obits, it said Steve Jobs was not an inventor. He didn't invent the damned iPhone. BlackBerry was there and other things. He was, and this is a perfect word, he was a tinkerer. he took something and he changed it and he changed it and he changed it. And in the end, it wasn't even recognizable, but it wasn't by, sitting on a mountaintop and having an epiphany, which isn't fair because he sat in Japanese tea gardens to understand the simplicity that is the basis of the Apple's success. But that's another story.
So what I hear you saying is, if we're trying things, some of those things won't work out.
No,
most of them won't work out, but let's learn from it.
99%, Mark, that's what Soichiro Honda said. The Honda founder, he said, success is that 1% that emerges from the 99% that's failure. Can't argue with him.
Yeah. So one thing I see in your work, when we talk about the importance of learning from mistakes. You talk about, a minute ago, you called it decent behavior. In this book, you talk about hiring people who are nice. And I've worked in workplaces where managers would yell and scream and blame when a mistake was made. And people don't mean to make mistakes. And I would argue being nice doesn't give people permission to screw up. I would say being kind, being constructive, make sure people don't hide and cover up mistakes.
Yeah.
That's better for the business. What do you say?
I totally agree. I mean, that I was trained in the behavioral sciences in part, and God in the behavioral sciences is B.F. Skinner. And Skinner said, negative feedback does not cause people to get better. It causes them to leave the playing field and not try again. And in that regard, and God, if there's one of the top 3 messages I'd love to leave indelibly in everybody's head, the research says there ought to be 30 positives for every negative. And again, as you said about the nice thing, it doesn't make you a chump. Somebody had this little riff that I came across a couple of years ago, and it was new to me. They said the magic words are yes and rather than yes but. It's great job, Mark, but you could have done more in chapter 2, as opposed to great job, Mark. And, I think we can really talk about some ways to make this better. And that might sound like semantics, but it's semantics like a 45 pistol being pointed at your head. It's huge. And you're right. People, I mean, there's a critical point here for our friends who are in sizable businesses. And by sizable, I don't mean giants. I mean, let's say 50 or more. And that is the most important living human beings in the organization are your first line supervisors. They are responsible for everything. And business leaders wouldn't disagree with me, but they don't spend the time they should on figuring out who to promote. And they are total suckers for promoting the person who has the biggest sales numbers or the most technical skills. And all of leadership is 100.00000% people. You got a tech problem, hire somebody who can deal with tech problems. Your job as a leader is the people, not the people half, but the people 99.5% part of it.
Yeah. And so when you talk about leaders, one thing that you're very vocal about on Twitter is the mistake companies make. And there's research to back this up, that it's a mistake to not have 50% women in executive roles, leadership roles. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. If you read the section in the new book, and I'm not trying to urge reading the book, I'm making a different statement. Every time I open my mouth, meaning my keyboard, look, I'm trained as an academic. I have a bloody PhD from Stanford. I don't open my mouth without data behind it. And I was trained, my thesis advisor was the biggest son of a bitch that you've ever met in your life. I said to somebody, if you want to understand Gene Webb, if you wrote in your thesis, the sun rose, you would have to cite Newton, for God's sake. So, these are not off the top of my head. So now I'm going to say, here's what the research says. And 2 key words for those who might get bent out of shape. On average. On average. On average, women are better leaders. On average, women are better salespeople. On average, women are better negotiators. On average, women are better investors. And if that's not enough for you, then you have the other half of the coin, is that women buy everything. She is your customer. She buys 80% of all the consumer goods. And in the United States now, over 50% of professional purchasing agents are women. So she is as likely to sign the RFP for the 5-year, $5 billion IS project as she is to pick the location of the family vacation. And as I said, on average, there are crappy women managers and there are fabulous male managers, but on average, and relative to the things I talk about, it's along the lines because, again, you just have to be so clear to say there are many exceptions. Women tend to be more empathetic. And that's right out of Darwin, for God's sakes. You and I made our money in those days by getting up early, sharpening our spear, and running around throwing spears at animals. I mean, there's this wonderful thing, which is so cool. I read this wonderful book called Compassionomics. Darwin never, ever, ever said survival of the fittest. That was some other guy. Spencer was his name. Darwin said survival of the best community. It was the opposite. If you have a great community, you raise more children. If you raise more children, you have a bigger community that can develop itself. If you have a greater community, you grow more food coming out of the ground instead of just depending on the spear chuckers. And so it's just, I mean, this is a wonderful book, by the way. Everybody has to buy. I'd like you to buy my book, but I'm forcing you to buy Compassionomics. And there's one story I'm going to tell out of that, but let's keep going.
Well, I was just going to say real quick, it sounds like, so you've pointed out a mistake. People misunderstand or misportray Darwin in this, it often gets portrayed as, this individualistic idea. What you're saying is that it's more along the lines of the phrase that some people mock, this phrase, it takes a village. But it sounds like, boy, that really is the case.
That is exactly the case, for everything known to humankind. Yeah, I mean, the Darwin, which also goes back to an earlier comment on the women's thing. Men compete because we compete. Here's the investment story and why women are better investors. There's a whole book, by the way. Buy this next book too. You don't have to read it. It's worth it for the title. And the book title, written by a senior person at the Motley Fool, is Warren Buffett Invests Like a Girl and Why You Should Too. And here's the problem. You and I are sitting at trading. We'll go back to F2F world. You and I are sitting at trading desks, and we know each other. And you have a day, probably mainly luck, that is absolutely fabulous. And now it's an hour before the market closes. Mark is not going to beat my ass on Tuesday. And excuse the language again. So I buy all sorts of risky crap in the last half hour with the sole purpose of beating Mark. And I mean, it's insane, but that's the way we boys operate. And it's a loser's strategy. The people who are screaming that you were talking about, are much more likely to be male than female. And it's stunning.
Yeah. So one other question I want to ask you before we have to wrap up here. I'm an introvert, so there's a little bit of selfish motivation in this question. You advocate for introverts. You say it's a mistake to think that noisy people are the best leaders, the best at sales, the most creative. Why is that?
Because I steal shamelessly, with attribution, from a book called Quiet, the author of whom is a woman by the name of Susan Cain. And again, it is a book. Susan was trained as a lawyer. There's no BS in this book. This is, again, all hard-nosed research. And introverts, it was such an incredible book. I was, here I was 70 when the thing came out. And I thought, God almighty, you've implicitly been on the side of noisy people for the last 50 years. And Susan shows that that's always the deal. The noisy guy gets the promotion, and the quiet guy is the best leader because he actually listens to people. And when they do all this group research, where you put 10 introverts and 10 extroverts, and they work on some problem, the extroverts come up with 25 solutions, all of which are random bullshit. The introverts come up with 3 solutions, but they've really been thought out. And in baseball terms, the odds of getting at least a ground rule double are a lot higher for the introverts. And it's just, as I said, I really felt I'd been running around the world and I had been diminishing and dismissing the incredible importance of finding, promoting the quiet people. And it's just, and she shows a million times the instinct is if somebody talks, that means, oh, she goes through all this stuff. If you talk a lot, you are more intelligent, you are more physically attractive. All of these things that are associated with noise. And incidentally, which may surprise some people who are watching us, is in Susan's book. There's a really good introvert extrovert test. And I bet I scored as high as you did on the introvert scale. And which doesn't mean I can't give a good speech. But I mean, the classic example, my wife and I, in the days of F2F, have a Christmas party or something like that. There are 30 people there. It's an hour-long party. I always talk to the same person for an hour.
And you're ready to go home first, right?
Yeah, yeah. But it's a classic example. You know, I dig into you, and we have this incredible conversation about what's going on in the world. The extrovert flits and flits and flits, and Susan always grabs me, and she said, "This is our party, Tom. You need to talk. Talk to someone." We went to a summer party a couple of years ago. About a month later, I ran into the woman who's home. It was one of those things to do on a July 4th afternoon or something. And I said to her, I said, "Kate, I am so embarrassed." I said, "We came to your party. I loved your party. And I never came and said to you, thank you for inviting us to the party. I ran into Dick Smith right after I came in, and we talked for the next hour and a half." And that's what introverts tend to do.
Yeah. So, wow, I was not expecting to hear about Tom Peters' party mistakes.
Yeah. Well, there is that. Well, the other thing relative to the I guess I'd call it the deeper phenomenon. There are personal mistakes that I've made that I have no intention of sharing with you. And that 50 or 60 years later, I am deeply ashamed of myself. And I think almost all of us, have a few of those in our background. So, if you've got a couple of those, don't think it makes you an idiot. It makes you normal. But a lot of people want me to write a memoir, and I said I can't, because the value of a memoir is honesty. And there are half dozen things that probably have influenced my life that I would no more put in print than fly to the moon without a spaceship. Let me just tell you this one thing that is vaguely related. It's definitely related to extreme humanism. I fell down, I don't know, a couple months ago and hit my head pretty hard. And so they did a brain CAT scan. So we'll talk about CAT scans. I go in to get my CAT scan, and there's a tech, and the tech or two techs administer the CAT scan. 30 minutes later, if it was an emergency, and 18 hours later, the radiologist, the big dude, reads the CAT scan. Okay. So they did this experiment, and the radiologist is looking at wavy charts and graphs and data pouring in front of him on his big screen. And they did this experiment. I'm going to say they did not do this with me. When I come in, the metaphorical Tom, they say, "Would you mind if we took your picture?" And so they take my picture, and I just assume it's for the files. So we have two states of nature in the research. Radiologists who have no picture, and so Tom is ones and zeros and wavy lines, and radiologists who in the upper right-hand corner of their screen have a photo of Tom. And the numbers are staggering. The amount of time they spend on doing the diagnosis doubles if my photo is up there. Their term is anomalies. What they're looking for in the picture is some weird thing that's just a little bit out of kilter that might give you a clue about what's going on. They find many, many more times anomalies if the picture is there. And it's just I really hope everybody listens to that. And we have all intelligent people listening to us so they can make the transfer to their working life. Just humanize it one itty bitty teeny weeny way, and suddenly you've got an entire different planet. I mean, I just love that example. And I love it because you can tell it in 2 minutes, and because it's a clobber you over the head example.
Yeah,
that's
powerful.
And damn it, all of this is, we will, one hopes, get past the pandemic, but we are not getting past artificial intelligence anytime soon, and it's going to accelerate on a path that looks like that, not like that. And what I argue throughout the book is the best defense, and I don't use the word, I make it clear I'm not, best offense, is to humanize the products and the services that you deliver, and use every tool known to humankind to deliver your podcast or whatever else it is. But the focus is on the human, and this is not just because of my age. I don't know what the hell happens in 40 years. But what I know is that in order to get to 20 years from now, you got to live through the next 20 years, starting this minute with our conversation. And so it's lovely to talk about the long term, but you got to get through the next 6 months. You got to get through the next 6 years. And for the next 6 or 10 or 15 years, AI is not going to take over the planet. I mean, self-driving. I've talked to a lot of people. It's going to take roughly forever. The technology is there, but 83,726 different municipalities have to pass regulations for self-driving. And that ain't happening before dawn tomorrow.
Yeah. And can Tesla and these other companies practice leadership styles that embrace extreme humanism so they can create better design, better products, better companies? That's the opportunity. Better companies.
Yeah. I don't want to reveal my political leanings, and I don't believe that the union is the answer to everything by a long shot. I hope the Amazon people in the warehouses get their union.
I hope they get better working conditions one way or
another,
I hope from what's been reported. Yeah.
I mean, the union is not the point, but the point is something radical has to happen. We don't need improvement. We need Uncle Jeffy to wake up in the morning and say, well, I've already got my $1 trillion. Maybe I could share a couple pennies with Mark and Tom.
Yeah. Well, Tom, I hate to cut you off because I love everything that you're sharing here. And I would love to have the 90-minute discussion or the 3-hour-long Joe Rogan podcast, but I'm told we don't have that much time. So, Tom, it's been a real pleasure to be able to interview you again. The most recent book, again, is Excellence Now, Extreme Humanism. Tom's website is tompeters.com, and you can find him on Twitter. He's a lively follow.
Well, I'm going to add 2 seconds to this thing. When the pandemic came along, my wife was doing a lot of community stuff and so on, and I thought, here you are, Peter, sitting on your ass. And so I didn't pretend to have expertise, but we started going around and saying to people with podcasts, Tom would like to talk about leadership in the time of COVID-19. And along the way, and this is a good ending point maybe for both of us, but certainly for me, came the COVID-19 Leadership 7. And the Leadership 7 are: be kind, be caring, be patient, be forgiving, be positive, be present, walk in the other person's shoes. I have said, and will continue to say, to leaders the way that you have behaved and are behaving now during this once a century, we hope, pandemic will define your professional career. It's as simple as that. This will be the moment. How did he behave? You know, this is what here's my definition of good behavior on the part of a boss. The boss is running a 20-person group, and they have maybe even a couple Zoom meetings a day. And, you know, there is, we'll call it Jane or Harry, it doesn't really matter, is one of the people on my team. And, you know, we've now probably had 40 meetings. And Jane or Harry has always showed up on time and always been on their seat, in their seat on time. So I, on a private call or whatever, I call Harry in. I said, Harry, I'm going to give you some feedback. And I said, it's going to be negative feedback. And I said, here's my negative feedback. Would you please miss some meetings? I happen to know that you've got 2 kids at home. I happen to know that you have which a boss ought to always know, an 80-year-old mother who is in an assisted living activity. And I know that upstairs your wife is teaching a 3rd grade class. And I said, take care of yourself, take care of your mom, take care of your family. And it's really okay not to be awesomely productive. Be late, miss the meeting, blow us off. You know, obviously not 100% of the time, but put first things first. And first things are not an 1/8% productivity hit for our group.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that reminder and for your advocacy there. So, Tom, really a pleasure to have you here on the podcast. Really enjoy it. Thank you. Thank you for the time today.
Well, I thank you at least as much or more. Been doing this, as I say several times in the book, for 43 years. The message is straightforward. Not enough people are listening. And so you are giving me the opportunity to talk about the stuff that is most important in my life. So I don't know whether you got a good deal or not with this half hour. I did.
I did.
I got to talk to some more people. You know, it ain't rocket science. I said to somebody, I have all these degrees, but if you want to understand everything in my books, you must show me a signed certificate of graduation from the 4th grade. You know, that's the extent of it. Be decent, take care of people, play around. I know that you can get a hold of Michael Schrage at MIT, but there's a term of his that I should have used today. He says innovation, the key to innovation, and this is so much on the failure thing, is, listen to this term, serious play. Trying stuff is playful. Serious play, it doesn't mean, you know, being sloppy, but the translation of the word play into the notion of innovation in a business enterprise or any other enterprise is a very cool thing that can't be resolved by me saying it in 30 seconds. Grab Michael if you can. He's an MIT professor and he's a good guy.
All right. Well, good. Great idea. Thank you for that. And again, thank you for everything that you're doing and continue to do. Last thing I'll say is, you know, in the book, you said something like, you know, it's your last hurrah. I hope not. I'm sure book 20 will be here at some point.
Well, who knows? I really, relative to an earlier comment, I realized while writing that this book is my memoir. It's about the ideas that I've spent 43 years of my life on. And I have a neighbor who's a world famous social psychologist, and she's doing a memoir, and she called it an ideas memoir. And it is a memoir. I mean, this is what I've been doing, you know, 2,500 speeches, 7,500 flight legs, 20 effing books, and so on. This is what I do. And, you know, the only reason I'll write number 20 is my frustration once again boiling over that this is stuff that doesn't require more than a 4th grade diploma, and yet we don't do it. And let us both pray, whether we are atheists or whether we're 6 morning masses a week people, let us pray that some of the decent things in terms of behavior that have come during this pandemic will stick, and that we will not unwittingly just go back to business as usual. I mean, literally, down on both knees and just hoping that this will turn a little bit of a corner. And again, the other thing, because we have practical people watching this, all the data is clear. Do the right stuff with people and you make more money. This is not sweetness and light and ignore the realities of business. It works. It's not going to get you the win in the next 60 days. But when we extend the time frame to a year or a couple of years, the best behavior toward our people is just plain carrying bags of $100 bills to the bank.
Well said, Tom. So again, thank you so much for being here on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Well, as I said to you, the feeling is mutual. You've given me a bigger opportunity than I've given you. So thank you.